Hey there, welcome to my seed starting station. In today's video, I'd like to show you exactly how I start seeds from start to finish, indoors, and everything in between. I've been doing this for a while now, and it is one of my favorite parts of gardening, truly. So if you've never started seeds indoors, or maybe you just need a quick refresher, I hope you will follow along and start some seeds with me. And just as a quick sneak preview here, let me show you what we're gonna end up with in about a week. Looking good. All right, let's do this thing. All right, first thing I'm gonna do is just prep some growing medium in this little pot that I have here. I don't know, I've just been using this for years. Honestly, up until about a year ago, y'all, I would have said just make your own seed starting mix or just buy some okay quality potting mix and then sift out any of the big woody bits and you'd be left with a pretty good seed starting mix that way. But the prices of everything have gone a little bit insane. And what has happened is that a true seed starting mix, like a pre-made, purpose-made seed starting mix, like this one right here, has kind of become the cheaper option, or at least a reasonable option. So I would say as of right now, early 2023, go ahead and just buy some seed starting mix. This is probably as good of a deal as you're gonna get compared to anything else, even compared to doing it yourself. So I'm gonna go ahead and just fill up my little bucket here with seed starting mix. Now, when I do this, you're gonna notice that there's gonna be some powder kind of coming out. It just is super fine stuff. And when it's dry, it almost like aerosolizes. It just gets up into the air really easily. So you kind of want to do it slow and steady. I'm going to be doing 8 trays today, which is, you know, a lot. Almost 600 little seedling cells. So I need quite a bit of dirt. I'll go ahead and put that in. All right. So I've got this mostly full. Now, the thing about seed starting mix is, it's really, really fine, and it's really, really simple. It doesn't actually contain that much ingredients. Generally speaking, it's gonna have a structure and moisture retention ingredient, something like sphagnum peat moss. It's gonna have a drainage ingredient, something like perlite. It's gonna have a water retention and nutrient retention ingredient, something like vermiculite. And it may or may not have some trace amounts of nutrients in it. But generally speaking, it's either gonna have very little nutrients or no nutrients. And you can go ahead and leave it as is, as long as you're really, really careful to give your seedlings, once they pop up, some supplemental nutrients later on. But what I have found is the whole process is just a lot less error prone, and you're more likely to get healthy seedlings if you go ahead and just add a little bit of fertilizer into the mix now. I've got a 1/3 cup measure here, and I'm going to add 2/3 of a cup into this pot. So I'm gonna mix in some of this right now, just while the whole product is still dry. Just make sure we're really getting it in there. All right, so this is kind of mixed in nicely here. So before I actually go ahead and put this mix into the seed starting trays, I'm gonna wet it down. And I definitely suggest you do the same. Working with truly bone dry seed starting mix, anything that is primarily perlite and sphagnum peat moss, is a nightmare. It gets everywhere, and it's really, really difficult to actually get it wet. It is hydrophobic when it is bone dry like this. So it's much, much easier if you slowly add water when it's in a bucket like this and mechanically turn it with your hands, instead of trying to get it wet after you actually put it into whatever you're planting your seeds into. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Just got some low flow here from the garden hose, and I am just mixing it up as we go. You'll find I'm not too precious about this whole process in general. If a little bit of soil gets on the ground, I'm not gonna worry about it. It's gardening. It really takes a lot of water to fully wet it out. All right, the next thing we should talk about is containers. Basically, you're gonna need 2 things. You're gonna need something to put your seeds into, put the dirt into, like this. This is a extremely standard, cheap, super helpful, amazing 72 cell seedling tray. I absolutely love these. You don't need them. You could use a plastic takeout container if you wanted. But the really nice thing about these is each one of these little cells is like the perfect size for a spring seedling that you're gonna put out while it's still quite small. We're not potting up our lettuce, right? And the second thing that I really like about these is they just make it a lot easier to isolate each plant and, more importantly, its root systems. What happens when you're growing in something like a takeout container and you're putting lots of seeds, you can imagine that we're planting in this. Actually, if you were just putting all your dirt in here and then you were laying seeds on here, all the root systems from all the different plants would intermingle. And what I found is that those plants generally are less productive. Any amount of time where the roots are getting really bunched up and mixed up, that is an unproductive period for those root systems. It's better if we can isolate the root systems into something like this. And that's why I recommend grabbing these 72 cell trays if at all possible. But again, if you're just getting started, you don't want to spend the money on it, totally understand. You can grab a takeout container or whatever you have lying around. That's just what I use and what I recommend. And then with each one of these, we pair it with a propagation tray. Now, this is obviously a purpose-made item that fits the 72 cell trays. But basically all this is a plastic tray with a lip on it that can contain water. And you need it to have large enough sides that you can actually put water down in here. It's not just about catching a little bit of drippage from your main trays. You actually want to be able to add significant amount of water into this and then put this tray back on top. So that's what you're looking for. I actually used to use like old bucket lids or old baking trays that had good, big sides to them. So definitely you don't need to go out and buy these right away. My dog is eating some herbs right now, but they are really handy. And again, they fit these 72 cell trays pretty well. So if you're looking for these, this would be a 72 cell seedling tray, 10 by 20. And this is a 10 by 20, 10 inch by 20 inch propagation tray. And they're really standardized. You can get them on Amazon, you can get them at gardening stores, wherever. We are going to be starting 8 trays of these. So I basically have 16 total items, 8 pairs of these. So to start, I'm just gonna lay out the first 4. We're gonna get them full up of dirt. All right, so again, we're gonna go ahead and use our pre-moistened dirt. I'll probably have to do a couple rounds of this. I don't know why I still use this bucket. It's really not big enough for my purposes. I think just kind of for nostalgia's sake, I've been doing it so long. But you don't need to be too precious about this. We're just gonna dump dirt on each one of these trays and then level it out. There's nothing really to it. If you were using a takeout container, you do the exact same thing. You're just trying to get the dirt up to the top lip of the container. You don't want it to be too dense, but if you're using a seed starting mix, or if you've done your own kind of DIY mix, or you're using a potting mix that you've sifted, you're probably not gonna get it too dense. I wouldn't worry about that too much. The bigger issue is you don't want a lot of pockets of air. And I'm gonna show you something after we're a little bit further along that can help with that. But basically pockets of air are detrimental to root growth. So that's something we're just gonna try and avoid. And I like to do the step of adding dirt inside the tray beneath. And that way, if there's any overflow, it's not getting kind of onto the ground and I can capture it. And then what I'll do is I'll just pour it out into the bag or back into a different container later on, and I'm not wasting anything. And the only thing that I have done other than fill up the trays is just grab it, kind of give it a few quick pats like that. And what that does is just make sure that any remaining air pockets within the soil kind of get pushed down. And that's really what we're going for. So just as a heads up, I don't use any sort of seed labels. I think they're kind of nuts in this day and age. It's 2023, we don't need to use seed labels. All I use is a Google spreadsheet on my phone to track which tray gets what kind of seeds. So I know that this one is going to be tatsoi. This one is going to be rainbow Swiss chard. This one on the right here, or my right, your left, is going to be half arugula and then half spinach. And then this last one over here is going to be Tokyo Bacana mustard. Now, tatsoi is a mustard, which means that it's gonna have really small sort of spherical seeds. And in general, for any of my sort of cheaper heirloom seeds, I'm gonna err on the side of using too many seeds. I promise if you are planting into little containers like this, you're still gonna end up using a lot less seeds than you would if you were direct sowing into the ground. So I'm gonna err on the side of, say, 3 seeds-ish per little cell. What's nice is that I'm only doing tatsoi in this whole container, so it's not a big deal if some get a couple more, some get a couple less. I can easily transplant just in case there's any cells that don't get any germination, although we'll probably get at least one seedling in every cell if we're planting 2 to 3 in each cell. So what I like to do is just create a really shallow indent in each one of these cells and then go back and plant them and then just kind of sweep a little bit of dirt back over it. Most of our spring leafy green seeds, they don't need light to germinate, but they also don't want to be planted too deep. So basically we want to plant them underneath the surface of the soil, but not super deep. So I just do a really small indent in each one of these cells. And the other nice thing this does, just makes it easy for me to tell which cell I've actually already planted in, which can actually be a little bit tricky if you're going kind of fast or if you're thinking about other things. You know, you're doing this for a couple hours, you're gonna lose track of where you've actually planted. So this just makes it easy on me to know where I've already planted. I've tried a few different methods. Different folks have their preferences. They're all good. Another decent way to do this would be just to not quite fill up each of the cells and then pour over a little additional potting mix. That works fine. This is just my preference, a little indent. All right, so I'm just gonna put a whole bunch of seeds into my hand. The other thing is that I bought all of these from MI Gardener, and I've had really good luck with their seeds. One of my favorite seed stores, I don't just say that because they're a popular YouTuber, they do a really fantastic seed business. I really, really like buying from them. They give you plenty of seeds and they also only charge $2. And they're all heirlooms. I plant a mixture of both heirloom and hybrid seeds, but all of my gardeners are heirlooms, so they tend to be very, very cheap. So I'm not gonna worry about how many I'm using. If I end up going through them, I'll just buy some extras. So again, just shooting for in the range of 2 to 3 seeds per cell. We will have more than 72 seedlings come up, and it is not difficult at all to transplant the extras from one cell into any cells that didn't get any germination at all. And all I'm gonna do is come back over into each one of these cells and just use my fingers to slightly bury those seeds. In general, good rule of thumb, you're shooting for about as much dirt over the seed as the seed is tall. So the seed should be buried about the same depth it is tall. And these are pretty small seeds, so they do not need to be very deep. The more important thing is that the dirt over them isn't overly dense and that the dirt under it isn't overly dense, because then they'll have a hard time pushing through it and they'll have a hard time pushing roots down. And you might even see some strange behavior where the roots, the seedling basically comes up upside down or sideways, or just unhealthy in a number of different ways. And then if you do find any big chunks of wood or whatever, it happens even in a seed starting mix, just go ahead and toss them out. You really don't want any chunks above the seeds. It's not that big a deal if there's a couple little bits and bobs underneath the seeds, but you don't want them on top. And that's it. So I'm gonna make sure that we put that tray back right here because I'm gonna be putting it onto my rack in the same order that I planted in, and that just helps me make sure that I know exactly what is in each tray. Again, I don't use any kind of labels. At most, what I will do is just take a piece of tape with some Sharpie, write on the piece of tape, and then slap it on one of these containers. But in general, just make it really easy on myself using a spreadsheet on just a Google spreadsheet on my phone, and then just planting only 1 or 2 seeds, with a couple exceptions, but mostly I only plant 1 or 2 types of seeds per tray, and that just makes it really, really easy. Next up, we've got rainbow Swiss chard. Now, Swiss chard is a very different kind of seed. It's actually a compound seed, and it needs to be buried somewhat deeper. This couldn't be any easier because we're just doing 1 per. Boom. If you buy from a place like Johnny's, and we're doing Johnny's seeds today as well, they'll actually test the batch and they will let you know right on the paper slip what their germination rate was when they tested it. And normally you're getting the seeds, you know, a month to a year after they tested it. So your germination rate's not gonna be quite as good as theirs was because your seeds are just a little bit older than their seeds. But that can be really nice because it can kind of let you know ahead of time how many seeds you're gonna need to plant to get your desired number of plants. So for me, I wanna grow between 25 and 50% more seedlings than I actually intend to transplant out. And that's just because some number of them are going to grow slow or poor, or they're gonna get a fungal disease, or they're just not gonna be the strongest, right? Or I'm gonna give them away. Whatever it is, you're gonna want more seedlings than you actually intend to transplant out into the garden. So for instance, if we were planning to plant out 10 Swiss chard, I would want to plant between, say, 13 and 15. Again, we're gonna just do that same thing. Gonna come back through each one of these little cells and just gently cover the seeds with the soil that we displaced when we made the little shallow divot. Obviously, the process is exactly the same indoors as it is outside, but I thought I would kind of change up the view here just so you can see exactly what we're doing. Next up, I'm gonna be growing a full tray of Mizuna mustard. Mizuna is an absolutely incredible mustard green. I made a whole video on it. It is my single favorite cool weather crop at this point. It's very similar to tatsoi, the other mustard that we already planted. So I'm just gonna take a couple seeds, dab them right into each of the little shallow divots that we've made here. Again, just going for 2 to 3 seeds per without wasting a lot of time. Hey there, sorry for the interruption. I've got a quick request here. Basically, if you think this video is proving useful, can I ask you to quickly hit that like button down there? It really helps us out. I super appreciate it. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the seedlings. Okay, so the very first thing we need to do before anything else, after getting our seeds into the ground, is just give them one quick overhead watering. And try and keep in mind that the goal with this is not necessarily to actually water down the soil. We already did that when we were mixing it up in the first place. The goal with this is to try and help get some good contact between the seeds and the soil. That's really what's going to aid germination. You want really good seed to soil contact. Now the other thing it does is just help kind of compress down the soil a little bit and make sure there's no excessive air pockets. The soil is already pretty moist. I'm not going to overdo it. That's about it. All right, so now that we have them nice and watered in, what we're going to do is place the whole tray somewhere warm. I'm using this 40 by 20 seedling heat mat. These are obviously super effective. They're built for this exact job. They do a really good job. If you can stand to spend, say, $10 on a smaller version of this, I would say they do work really well. Otherwise, if you don't want to shell out that money right now, totally understandable. You can also use a windowsill. You can also use just the outside if it's warmed up enough where you are. You just want to remember to bring them inside at night, or just a warm spot in your house will even work. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that even if your soil is a little bit cooler and you don't have one of these heat mats, it's not going to prevent germination, it's just going to slow down germination. So up to you how you want to handle that. All right, y'all, look at that. Super cool. We're starting to see germination. This is about 2 days after I planted the seeds. And the thing that you want to keep in mind is that you do not want to let these little seedlings go more than a night, really, more than a third of a day before getting light. The moment you start seeing those sprouts pop up, and let's see if we can get a little bit closer in here. The moment we start seeing them pop up, even though they're tiny like this, we want to get them under some strong light. It's really easy to let them go too long and kind of grow a little bit weak and spindly and leggy, just because these cool weather greens can germinate so quickly. Okay guys, the next thing I want to talk about is thinning out your seedlings. At this point, we're starting to see a lot of these cells come up with a lot of different seedlings, right? There's 4 or 5 in some of these. And what I would normally say is you want to start thinning them out or culling the extra seedlings as soon as possible to make sure that the strongest one has the best chance of developing a really good root system and that they're not competing with each other in there. What I am going to do though right now is give these about another day, maybe another day and a half. And the reason that I'm gonna do that is you can see, while some of the cells have lots of seedlings in them, there are still quite a few empty cells. And I wanna give those empty cells another day or so to hopefully germinate, and I think most of them will germinate. I think we'll get close to 100%. Alrighty, it is the next day and we've got 2 tasks ahead of ourselves this morning. First off, some of the trays have gotten a little bit dry, and I'll show you how you can identify that. So we need to give them some water, but we're gonna be doing it a little bit differently this time. We're gonna be bottom watering. And second off, it is time to start thinning out or culling some of the trays that have too many seeds germinating. So we're gonna take a look at both of those in turn. But to start off, let me show you how to identify when a tray is ready for some extra moisture. So this right here is our tray of Swiss chard, and Swiss chard is one of the slower seeds to germinate, so there's nothing popping up yet. But what you can see is that lots of the cells here are starting to grow this kind of light brown, even a little bit grayish color. And what that means is that the tops of the cells have started drying out, and that's exactly what we want. We really don't want to be watering until the top line of soil starts to dry out. And the reason that we do that, we let it get a little bit dry on the top there, is that helps eliminate one of the major problems of starting seeds inside, which is fungal issues. So by letting that top layer dry out a little bit, we're really cutting down on the risk of fungal disease. And then the other thing we can do to see whether or not this tray is ready to be watered is just lift it up and kind of judge how heavy it is. This is super, super, super light right now compared to when we put it in, which means most of the moisture weight, most of the weight from the water in this tray is gone. Let me just show you one that I watered last night. Down here, you can see that the tops of the cells are still very dark brown, almost black. This has a lot of moisture left. I definitely wouldn't want to water this one again because I would be just asking for fungal issues. So we're gonna let this one dry out and go ahead and put this one back into a tray and water it up. All right, we've got that same exact tray of seeds up next to my kitchen sink, and all I'm gonna do is just slide it over in the propagation tray to give myself a little bit of room to put the water in. Now, basically all we wanna do is add about 1/3 of an inch of water into this propagation tray. And then via the power of wicking or capillary action, each of the individual cells will suck up water from the tray, from beneath. As I mentioned before, we are not going to top water again. All that's gonna do is dislodge the seeds, damage the seedlings, and again, ask for problems with fungal issues. Much, 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 much better to bottom water by placing water into the propagation tray or whatever drainless tray you have underneath there. The biggest mistake I would see people making with this is adding too much water. In fact, I like to err on the side of adding too little water because you can always add a little bit extra if not all of the cells seem like they have fully wetted out. And the reason I don't want to add too much water is because if we let these trays sit in a propagation tray, if we let these seedling trays sit in a propagation tray that is full of water, still has a lot of moisture left in it, for a long time, again, basically what we are asking for is bacterial and fungal growth that is actually pretty likely to harm or even kill our really, really fragile seedlings. Now, the flip side of that is if you add too much water, you can always dump it out. Wait half an hour. If there's still a significant amount of water left in the bottom of this drainless tray, go ahead and dump it out. But the problem with doing that is you're basically systematically flushing out the nutrients from the soil and draining it away. So you don't want to do that too many times. It's okay to do it once or twice with a little bit of water, but ideally you're just adding enough water that the capillary action will pull it all into the soil and you're not having to drain any away after half an hour or an hour, whatever it is. So yeah, again, we're just gonna add about 1/3 of an inch into this drainless tray. And of course you need to do this on a flat surface so that you can make sure the whole tray is getting an even amount of water. And that is about it. That should be plenty. I know it doesn't look like a whole lot of water, and really it's not. I'm just doing it about 1/3 of an inch up, or even really 1/4 of an inch above sort of the highest point of this drainless propagation tray. It's got grooves in it to make this process a little bit easier. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just put the tray back into place. One thing to keep in mind is that these little seedling trays have a tendency to get kind of propped up, or they get a little bit mangled basically. And so you wanna just gently push down to make sure that all sides and all cells are pressed down against the bottom of the tray so that they can get that water sucked up from the bottom. And all I'm gonna do now is go ahead and place the whole thing back onto the heat mat exactly where it was before. Okay, on to our second task of the day, which is thinning out the seedlings so that they're not competing with each other in those teeny tiny little cells. Let's get to it. Okay, as you can see, the vast majority of the cells in this tray of Tokyo Bacon cabbage have more than one seedling. And if we were to leave them like this, these cells like this would grow super tall and leggy and weak. Basically, we'd be growing microgreens, and we don't want that. Now, we do have a few cells in here that don't have any seedlings, but if you take a close look in here, or in here, or right there, they actually are popping up already. I've taken a good look at this tray, and almost every cell in here actually already does have something popping up. So it's a good time to go ahead and start thinning out the extras because some of these cells are getting a little bit out of control. So the way that I like to do it when the seedlings are still really, really small like this is just use my fingers and pull the extras out. A lot of folks don't like to actually pull out the extra seedlings because you do run the risk of damaging the roots or even pulling out the roots of the one that you're trying to keep. I find that when they're this small, they basically don't even really have roots. They're just a little shoot. So I don't worry about it too much. But if they were bigger, I would actually take a pair of snips or even clean scissors and just cut off the top really at the soil level, any of the extras I was trying to remove. But I find at this stage, if you're catching them really early, I don't really think it's necessary to do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and basically do that for almost all of them. One thing you'll note is I am gonna leave a couple of the cells with more than one seedling, especially in any cell where they're not so clumped up. So for instance, if you look at this one, we'll get a little bit closer there. If you look at this one, there's one over here and one over here, and I'll probably leave two growing in this cell because what that will allow me to do is just have an extra for transplanting later, because you never know, some of these ones that are popping up a little bit late, like, let's see if I can find here, like say this cell, it might come in weak. There might be a reason that the cell isn't, the seed isn't germinating as quickly as the others. So we're gonna just leave a few extra seedlings so that we have the opportunity to transplant in a strong seedling into every cell, that there's no kind of weak laggards. Overall, I'm not overly worried about it. So yeah, just gonna go ahead and come through here, take a look in each cell, pick my winner, and pull out the extras. One thing I do want to show you is how to make up for any cells that you think aren't going to germinate. If you get a couple more days in here and it really seems like you're gonna have some empty cells, no worries. Just take one of the healthiest of the seedlings you just pulled out, grab a little tool like this jeweler screwdriver, make a little hole in an empty cell. Just gonna go like this. You need to make it surprisingly deep. Just gonna put it in right there. Voila, transplanted. It's really easy to do. And that is it for today. At this point, all you need to do is make sure you continue bottom watering, culling those extra seedlings, or transplanting as necessary until they're ready to harden off and transplant. And speaking of hardening off and transplanting, I've got a video on hardening off right here and another on how to transplant leafy greens right here if you're interested in checking those out. And as always, I hope to see you on the next one. Happy gardening, y'all.